In the opulent world of the rich and powerful, everything seemed perfect on the surface. Alex Kingston, a billionaire entrepreneur, was the epitome of success and charm. At 48, he was the CEO of Kingston Enterprises, a global conglomerate with interests in technology, real estate, and luxury goods. His life was a tapestry of high-profile business deals, glamorous parties, and a seemingly perfect family. Married to his college sweetheart, Laura Kingston, for over 20 years, Alex had 3 children who were the apple of his eye. To the outside world, they were the perfect family, a model of wealth, success, and stability. They lived in a sprawling mansion in the exclusive suburbs of Los Angeles, their lives filled with charity galas, private jets, and vacations at exotic locales. But beneath the polished veneer, cracks were beginning to show. The pressures of maintaining a billion-dollar empire had taken their toll on Alex. His relationship with Laura had become strained, their conversations limited to superficial pleasantries and business discussions. The passion that once fueled their marriage had long since faded, replaced by a cold, polite distance that neither seemed willing to address. In the midst of this marital disconnect, Alex found himself drawn to the alluring yet enigmatic figure of Emily Grayson, a young receptionist working at Kingston Enterprises. At 26, Emily was ambitious and intelligent, with a beauty that turned heads wherever she went. She had been with the company for just over a year, and though her role was seemingly inconsequential, she had managed to catch the attention of the most powerful man in the building. It started innocently enough, a lingering glance during a meeting, a smile exchanged in the elevator. But as Alex's dissatisfaction with his personal life grew, so did his interest in Emily. She was everything his life had been missing: young, vibrant, and full of life. Their interactions, once brief and professional, began to take on a flirtatious tone. He would find reasons to visit the reception desk, lingering longer than necessary, exchanging small talk that hinted at something more. Emily, aware of Alex's status and power, was both flattered and cautious. She knew the risks involved in getting too close to someone like him, but the allure of the forbidden and the thrill of his attention were intoxicating. She played along, matching his flirtations with subtle encouragement, her own ambitions clouding her judgment. As the weeks passed, their secret attraction blossomed into a full-blown affair. They met in discreet locations, luxury hotels far from the prying eyes of Los Angeles, private dinners where they could be alone. For Alex, these stolen moments were a reprieve from the suffocating weight of his life. With Emily, he felt alive again, liberated from the gilded cage of his existence. But affairs, especially those with such disparate power dynamics, rarely end well. What began as a passionate escape soon spiraled into something darker. Emily, who had initially seen their relationship as a way to climb the corporate ladder, found herself growing emotionally attached to Alex. She wanted more than secret trysts and whispered promises. She wanted a place in his life, a future where she was more than just his mistress. Alex, however, was not willing to jeopardize his carefully constructed world. He made it clear that while he cared for her, their relationship could never be more than what it was, a secret affair. Emily's dreams of a life with Alex were shattered, replaced by a simmering resentment that grew with each passing day. The turning point came one night in mid-June. They had met at a secluded villa outside the city, a place where they could be alone without fear of being seen. But what was meant to be a night of passion quickly turned into a heated argument. Emily, emboldened by a few glasses of wine, confronted Alex, demanding to know where their relationship was headed. "You can't keep stringing me along like this, Alex," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and desperation. "I deserve more than being your dirty little secret." "Emily, we've talked about this," Alex replied, his tone exasperated. "I care about you, but I have a family. I have responsibilities. We can't be anything more than what we are." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Emily's face contorted with rage, and before she knew what she was doing, she grabbed the wine glass and hurled it against the wall, the sound of shattering glass echoing through the villa. "Is that all I am to you? Just a fling? Something to pass the time while your wife looks the other way? Keep your voice down," Alex hissed, glancing nervously at the door. You knew what this was from the beginning, but it was too late. The emotions Emily had kept bottled up for so long were now spilling over, and there was no stopping them. The argument escalated, accusations and insults flying back and forth until, finally, Alex stormed out, leaving Emily alone in the villa, her heart pounding with a mix of fury and despair. As she stood there, staring at the broken glass on the floor, a cold, dark thought began to form in her mind. If she couldn't have Alex, if she couldn't have the life she had envisioned, then she would make sure he paid for every lie, every false promise he had ever made. The illusion of perfection was about to shatter, and the consequences would be deadly. Emily's mind buzzed with anger and betrayal as she sat alone in the dimly lit villa. The night that was supposed to be filled with passion had turned into a confrontation that shattered any illusions she had about her future with Alex. As she paced the room, fragments of a dangerous plan began to take shape. If she couldn't have Alex, then she would ensure that no one else could either. In the days following their explosive argument, Alex tried to reach out to Emily, sending messages apologizing for his harsh words. But Emily ignored them. Instead, she immersed herself in plotting her revenge, her thoughts consumed by the idea of making Alex suffer as she had. She knew that confronting him again would lead nowhere. She needed a more permanent solution. On June 20th, Emily made her move. She called Alex, her voice soft and contrite, telling him she wanted to talk, to put everything behind them. Alex, relieved at the prospect of reconciliation, agreed to meet her at the villa. He arrived just after sunset, his expression cautious but hopeful as he entered the secluded property. Emily greeted him with a strained smile, leading him to the living room where a bottle of wine and 2 glasses waited on the table. Alex noticed the tension in her demeanor but dismissed it, eager to resolve their issues. They sat down, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken words. "I'm sorry for how I acted," Emily began, her eyes avoiding his. "I just got so caught up in my feelings. I know this can't be more than what it is, and I've accepted that." Alex relaxed slightly, reaching out to take her hand. "I'm glad you understand. I don't want to hurt you, Emily. We just have to be careful." She nodded, pouring them both a glass of wine. They drank in silence, the air still thick with unresolved tension. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she watched Alex sip the wine, waiting for the right moment. She had planned every detail meticulously, ensuring that this time he wouldn't be able to walk away. When Alex put down his glass, she leaned in closer, her voice barely a whisper. "I want to show you something." She led him down a narrow hallway to a small, dimly lit room at the back of the villa. Inside, the room was sparse, with just a single chair in the center. On the table next to it was a collection of items that caught Alex's attention: ropes, a blindfold, and a large, sharp knife gleaming under the soft light that Alex's brow furrowed in confusion. "What is this, Emily? I thought we could try something different tonight," she murmured, her eyes fixed on his. "Something exciting." He hesitated, sensing something was off, but Emily's seductive smile and the haze of the wine clouded his judgment. He let her guide him to the chair, allowing her to tie his hands behind his back, the rope tight and unyielding. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face as she secured the blindfold over his eyes, plunging him into darkness. "Emily, I don't know if—" "Sure," she whispered, her voice soothing as she picked up the knife from the table. "Just trust me." The next few moments were a blur. Alex felt the cold blade against his throat, his muscles tensing in fear, his mouth open to protest. But before he could say anything, Emily's grip tightened on the knife. With a swift, decisive motion, she plunged the blade into his chest, the force of the blow knocking the air out of his lungs. Alex gasped, his body jerking against the restraints as pain exploded through him. He tried to scream, but the sound died in his throat as she twisted the knife deeper, a cold, detached look on her face. Blood poured from the wound, soaking his shirt and pooling on the floor as his struggles grew weaker. "Why?" he choked out, his voice barely a whisper as the life drained from his eyes. Emily leaned in close, her lips brushing against his ear as she whispered, "Because you lied. You made me believe there was something more." She stepped back, watching dispassionately as Alex's body slumped in the chair, his head falling forward. The room was eerily silent, the only sound the faint drip of blood hitting the floor. Emily stood there for a moment, her her chest heaving as she stared at what she had done. The reality of her actions hit her like a tidal wave, but she felt no remorse, only a cold, numb satisfaction that she had finally taken control of her life, of her fate. She had loved him, but his betrayal had sealed his fate. Emily knew she had to act quickly. She grabbed a pair of gloves from her bag, wiping down everything she had touched. She removed the blindfold from Alex's lifeless eyes, the rope from his wrists, and carefully placed the knife back on the table. She had planned this meticulously, and there could be no mistakes. She checked her reflection in the mirror, making sure there were no traces of blood on her clothes or skin. Satisfied, she walked back into the living room, grabbed her purse, and slipped out of the villa into the cool night air. She drove away, her hands steady on the wheel. She felt a strange sense of calm. She had done what she had to do. The man who had deceived her, who had promised her the world and then snatched it away, was gone. Now, all that was left was to make sure no one found out the truth. Emily's mind raced with the possibilities, the alibis she would create, the lies she would tell. She had thought of everything, every detail, every potential slip-up. She would play the grieving lover, the shocked employee, the woman who had lost her boss and secret lover to a tragic accident. But deep down, she knew that getting away with murder was never easy. The game had just begun, and she would have to be smarter, more cunning than ever before if she wanted to walk away unscathed. The next morning, the news of Alex Kingston's death spread like wildfire. His body had been discovered by a cleaning crew who came to the villa, their screams echoing through the empty house as they stumbled upon the gruesome scene. Within hours, the villa was swarming with police and forensic teams, the air thick with the buzz of reporters and the shock of a community grappling with the sudden, violent death of one of its wealthiest citizens. Detective Sarah Nolan, a seasoned investigator with the Los Angeles Police Department, was assigned to the case. She arrived at the villa, her eyes scanning the scene with a practiced gaze. The crime scene was chaotic, yet something about it felt meticulously staged. The victim, Alex Kingston, sat in the chair, his eyes lifeless, the blood around him almost too perfect, too calculated. Nolan's instincts told her this wasn't a random act of violence. Someone had planned this murder, and they had planned it well. The first step was to piece together the events leading up to Alex's death. She started with his family and close associates, but it was the mention of Emily Grayson, the receptionist, that piqued her interest. Did Mr. Kingston have any known enemies or personal issues? Nolan asked Laura Kingston during the initial questioning at the Kingston mansion. Laura, her face pale and eyes red from crying, shook her head. No, everyone loved Alex. He was a good man, but there was a hesitation in her voice, a flicker of something behind her grief. What about his relationship with his employees? Anyone he might have been close to, someone who stood out? Nolan pressed. Laura's eyes narrowed slightly. There's this girl, Emily. I always thought there was something strange about her. She seemed too interested in Alex, but he said she was just a good worker. The mention of Emily's name was enough for Nolan to follow up. She headed to Kingston Enterprises, where Emily was already at work, seemingly unaffected by the news. As Nolan entered the office, she observed Emily closely. There was no sign of grief or shock, just a cool, collected demeanor that set off alarm bells in the detective's mind. Ms. Grayson, I'd like to ask you a few questions about Mr. Kingston, Nolan said, watching Emily's reaction carefully. Of course, Detective, Emily replied, her voice steady. It's such a tragedy. I still can't believe he's gone. Where were you last night? Nolan asked, her tone casual, but her eyes sharp. I was at home alone, Emily replied smoothly. I didn't hear about Alex until I came in this morning. It's just awful. Nolan nodded, but her instincts told her there was more to Emily than met the eye. She requested a search of Emily's apartment and reviewed the CCTV footage from the office parking lot. As she watched the footage, she saw Emily leaving the building around 5 p.m. and returning early the next morning. It was a small detail, but it caught Nolan's attention. The search of Emily's apartment yielded nothing significant. No blood-stained clothes, no murder weapon. But it was the absence of evidence that intrigued Nolan. Emily was too careful, too calculated. The detective knew she had to find the chink in Emily's armor. Days turned into weeks, and Nolan continued to dig. her obsession with the case growing. She revisited the crime scene, re-examined every piece of evidence, looking for something, anything that Emily might have overlooked. And then, she found it was a small, almost insignificant detail, a single, smeared fingerprint on the blindfold that had been used on Alex. It wasn't a clear print, but it was enough. Nolan had it analyzed, and while it didn't directly match Emily, it was similar enough to raise suspicion. With this new lead, Nolan confronted Emily again, this time at the police station. "We found your fingerprint at the scene," she lied, watching for any reaction. "You were there, weren't you?" Emily's face remained impassive, but her eyes flickered with something, a flash of fear that she quickly masked. "You have no proof," she said calmly, but there was a tremor in her voice. "We know about the affair," Nolan continued, her voice relentless. "We know you were angry, that you felt betrayed. You wanted revenge." Emily's composure cracked for just a moment, her hands clenched into fists. "You can't prove anything," she hissed, her voice low and furious. Nolan leaned forward, her eyes locked on Emily's. "You're right. I don't have enough to arrest you, but I will find it. You made a mistake, Emily, and I'll find it." For weeks, Nolan watched Emily's every move, waiting for her to slip up. And finally, she did. In a moment of panic, Emily tried to dispose of a pair of gloves she had kept hidden, a last piece of evidence that connected her to the crime. The gloves were found in a dumpster near her apartment, and a trace amount of Alex's blood was discovered on them. It was enough. Emily was arrested, her calm facade shattered as she was led away in handcuffs. She maintained her innocence, claiming the evidence was planted, that she had been framed. But the truth was clear. The woman who had seduced and killed Alex Kingston was now facing the consequences of her actions. In the end, Emily Grayson was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read, the once confident woman now a shadow of her former self. Alex Kingston's death had been avenged, but the fallout of his affair had destroyed more lives than anyone could have imagined. As Detective Nolan walked out of the courthouse, she couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness that always followed a case like this. Justice had been served, but the damage was irreversible. Alex was gone, and Emily would spend the rest of her life behind bars. A cautionary tale of lust, betrayal, and murder that left only pain in its wake.